I'm going to make buttermints, and I might even turn them into candy canes. Buttermints are made the same way as bread dough. Just think that you're swapping out flour for powdered sugar, and it's blended the same way. I have 3 1/4 cups powdered sugar in this bowl with an extra 1/4 cup of powdered sugar here in case the mixture is too wet and I have to add more. You know, it's like making bread. 1/3 cup of sweetened condensed milk. This is a 1/4 cup of softened butter, and it's a little over soft. I melted it for too long and I'm letting it cool off, but it'll be okay. I have red and white food coloring gel, and this is a 1/2 teaspoon of Loren's peppermint flavoring oil. The recipe called for peppermint extract, so this might be too much. I'm gonna use a small amount at a time and taste it and see where I'm at with it. I'm not gonna just pour the whole thing in. Y'all know me and my gloves. If it's anything like bread dough and I end up mixing it up by hand. Salt goes in first, and I'm going to incorporate the salt just like I do if I was making bread. Now I'm going in with the sweetened condensed milk. And the butter. I'll do it like this. I heated that butter up, but it's cold in here and it's kind of starting to harden up a little bit. And that condensed milk is cold. When you squeeze it together and it holds its shape, you have a dough. And now I'm going to add a little bit of flavoring oil to this. And I think the way I'll do this is just put some, scoop it up with my finger, and then blend it into the dough and see how that works, because I really don't know how much of that it's going to take. That peppermint oil is really strong. You know what? That little drop of flavoring oil was all it took. And I am so glad I didn't pour the whole thing in here. It worked. So now I'm going to ball this up. Now that I have my balls formed, I got them in this bowl, and I'm going to cover them to keep them from drying out. After I played with this dough, I realized that I have to add a teaspoon of water to it and work it to make it soft and pliable. The butter warms up as you work it, and that helps make it more malleable. So the recipe had bad instructions in it, and I just had to figure it out. See, it's going to crumble like this and come apart. And I just have to work that water into it and force it to come back together. It's very much like bread dough. But it's hard as modeling clay. I mean, this stuff is like mixing plumber's putty. If you ever want to strengthen your hands, this will do it. When I got done with that dry ball, it turned out like this. Nice and moist. And I'm going to put it in this bowl and keep it moist. Now I'm going to work these two together. When these balls dry out, you have to add a little bit of water to them to keep them malleable. Okay, now I'm going to flatten this out. And I'm going to add the food coloring to it. I want to make it a rich red. And I'm just going to keep adding food coloring and kneading it until I get the depth of color that I want. And that food coloring will add some moisture to it as well. Okay, now it's really malleable. It's, you know, it's easy to work now, and it's not sticking to my hands and falling apart and getting all crumbly. The more moisture you add to it, the more malleable it becomes. And that moisture will eventually evaporate and it will dry out. And these are buttermint, so that's what you want it to do, but you don't want it to dry out before you're done working with it. And more dye. I've heard people are allergic to red number 40 dye because it's a petroleum dye. And there's somebody's trying to push a bill through the state of Oklahoma to prevent food manufacturers from using petroleum-based dyes, like red number 40 especially, and yellow number 4, and the blue, and, you know, the basic dyes, because of allergies, especially among autistic and neurodivergent kids. And they're trying to force them to use food dyes like beet powder in place of red. And I'm not necessarily opposed to it, but, you know, give us the option. And better food labeling. You know, if something uses beet powder instead of red number 40, make a label for it. Because you never know what somebody's going to be allergic to. Some people have food allergies. Let's just be fair to everybody. That's all I'm saying. I think that's enough red. I can't stand for my work surface to be dirty, but it's especially important to clean your surface when you're using food colorings. If you're using more than one color, it's especially important to clean your surface and your tools, your equipment, change your gloves, whatever, in between colorings. Because this is what I got off my surface, all that red dye. And this is after drying it off, more red dye. The stuff travels. Keep that in mind if you're ever working with food coloring. With this one, I'm going to make smaller green mints. That red and the white is for the candy canes. Well, I think my green is done. Ain't that a pretty Grinch green? I'm having fun. And I'm going to try something. I'm going to use this jerky gun for something completely unconventional. I'm going to use it to press out my mints. It's working, y'all. It wore me out, but it worked. I've got perfect ropes. Getting to work out in the kitchen. I'm pushing the rest of it through by hand. And that's working surprisingly well too. You know what, y'all? That wasn't bad at all. Now, I'm going to cut these into small 1/2-inch size pieces. Now I'm going to put my mints on a splatter screen because they need to dry out. And I want them to dry out from all sides. I wasn't able to get the jerky gun to work for the smaller ropes for the candy canes, so I'm going to have to roll them out by hand. If you have a clay extruder, that might work better for this dough because it's thick as modeling clay. I wasn't able to use an extruder gun to make the candy canes, but I figured out how to make them. Had to blend the colors together into a marble effect and then roll it out into a rope and shape it into a cane to make a candy cane with it. And this is what I came up with. It'll work. And this is going onto the screen to dry out. If I can get it on there. I'll have to reshape it. I've gotten pretty good at rolling these out, so I'm going to show y'all how I make these candy canes. I take a pinch of white and a pinch of the red. They're about this size. The balls are about marble size. You know, big marbles. And I work them in my hands first. Now I roll them out. And I roll it into a fairly big rope like that. It's about 1/4 of an inch thick rope. Now I put them together like that, and then I roll them together. And if they break apart, I separate them. And I put them back together again and roll them out. And they're going to separate and come apart, and I just keep rolling them. And I roll it out until I get about 1/4 inch thick rope that's combined. It's marbled together. Then I pick up the screen, and I put the rope on the screen and shape it. It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be all the same width. In fact, none of them are. And no two are identical. And that's how I make my candy canes. When I want to dry out these mints, I put the little ones in a mesh bag and hang them up. And I have my candy canes hung up on baling wire between 2 paper clips. I tried putting them in a food dehydrator, and I had them in there at 125 for 36 hours, and they finally began to dry out. So I've decided to save my electricity and just let these things air dry for 2 or 3 weeks. And that's what you want to do anytime you make butter mints. Start on 3 weeks before your holiday. I'll show you what my candy canes look like. This is how I'm drying out my mints. The flavor is good. I'm sure they'll turn out just fine. If you want to make some butter mints for your holiday, give them a try. I'll see y'all later. Bye.